Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Manager of Webinars for Independent Banker Magazine. And on behalf of ICBA and Independent Banker Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of the slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources. You'll find that on the left side of your screen, and know that you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar, The Next Normal for Board Governance, is sponsored by OnBoard Virtual Meeting Management, an ICBA preferred service provider. And now I'd like to turn it over to your first speaker for today, Rob Kunzler, Chief Marketing Officer for OnBoard. Rob, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Janine. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. Great to virtually see everyone. Hopefully your day is going well. Yes, again, I'd love to introduce myself. My name is Rob Kunzler. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for OnBoard. I'm joined today by my colleague and friend, Doug Wilson, our Vice President of Products. You'll see a picture of him here in a moment. One thing I did just want to mention on the front end of this, we're very excited about this at OnBoard. We've recently done a bit of a rebrand. So for those of you that we have the pleasure with speaking today, you might have seen some of the promotional materials leading up to the event referencing Passageways, which is the name of our parent company. But we're very, very proudly presenting OnBoard, our board governance solution, as our brand name. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear. You're on the right place. We've got a great agenda that we want to walk you through today and some exciting insights that we've recently uncovered, and very much looking forward to the Q&A as we move into this. So let me just briefly walk through what we plan to walk through today. I'll give you again just some brief introductions of both Doug and me. We'll talk about a board effectiveness survey that we have recently completed, and I'm excited to share with this group today that you're getting a bit of a sneak peek. We plan to be announcing this board effectiveness survey and the outcomes and the insights next week, so you have an opportunity to see this before we go out more broadly. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the features of digitally enabled boards, and then wrap that up with developing a technology roadmap in terms of what that might look like for you and your organization. So as I mentioned, I'm joined today by Doug Wilson, our Vice President of Product. Doug's been a member of the team for several years now, and is a great thought leader and has a ton of great insights. So I'm excited for him to share some of the unique thoughts that we have. I've recently joined the organization, helping both our go-to-market teams as well as our customer teams serve our customers well. So with that being said, I'm going to move to the core of the presentation, which is, as I mentioned on the front end, a board effectiveness survey, and specifically how the global pandemic has transformed board work. A little bit about the survey itself. We came into this like you. The last 12, 14 months has been unique to say the least, and serving over 2,500 customers globally, we were very interested in how well boards have been performing, and the best way for us to better understand that was to develop a survey and ask some specific questions about performance, effectiveness, collaboration, and the like. So we conducted this survey in February and March of this year. We had over 280 director respondents provide their insights, very thoughtful, and I will mention that. Board members from 6 countries with a good cross-section of stakeholders, including executives, chairs, directors, and administrators, and also a strong cross-section across industry sectors. At the very top of the list, we were very pleased to see robust responses from financial institutions as well as some nonprofits, associations, and the like. So with that being said, I'll jump into a bit more of the insights that we found here. Maybe the most notable of which was, and this was a bit surprising to us, we did expect that there was going to be some effect on effectiveness of boards, but one of the things that came back very, very loudly and clearly was that 79, almost 80% of boards indicated that they improved effectiveness over the last 12 or 14 months. More specifically, the data showed us that 23% saw significant improvement in effectiveness and 56 saw slight improvement. I think it was our point of view coming into the survey that perhaps there would be some dilutive effect or some challenges, but we'll get into this in more specifics. A resounding response came back from the survey indicating that boards are performing better, including during this post-COVID environment. So we have a few more insights as to what might be, if we double click into that, what might be the cause of this and what impacts there are there. Moving forward, we did also note that collaboration seems to be improving, which is great. That's great news certainly for the boards. It's also great news for the organizations in which the boards serve. And in this particular case, 12% saw a significant increase in collaboration, 54% saw slight improvement. So again, strong results in light of some very significant organizational and broader market headwinds that we've all faced. One of the next questions, and we of course have a bias and certainly working with our customers, what effect does the organizations that are utilizing digital technologies have on their performance, their self-reported performance in terms of effectiveness and collaboration? And this too was certainly interesting to us. Of those that provided survey responses to us, 81% of, quote, digital boards reported improved effectiveness, while 54% of non-digital boards, so what we might consider organizations that are using more traditional or legacy analog tools for managing board operations and strategy, only 54% of them improved effectiveness. So there does seem to be a very positive and important correlation between the utilization of digital technologies and how well boards interact, how effective they can be and are, and certainly that came through loud and clear in this data. Moving forward, we did note that going digital and being digital first does have its advantages, and certainly we see some of that evidence as it relates to how organizations and boards performed during the last 12 or 14 months. That being said, it is certainly not a panacea. Board directors and respondents were very, very quick to point out that there are challenges even in this digital first or digital only environment in which we've operated in. Those include recreating casual face-to-face interactions, the ability to read body language, fewer opportunities for post-meeting conversations or ad hoc discussions, and in some ways, and we've certainly heard this in some of the post-survey interviews, less conducive to complex discussions. We've all probably spent more time than we could have ever imagined in Zoom and like technologies over the last year. Complex discussions can be just that, challenging. And then the other notable challenge that we did hear in this digital first environment is the training and adapting to new technologies. And certainly with the influx of a variety of different platforms for a variety of different purposes and uses, ensuring that all parts of the organization and the board group are adopting those technologies appropriately and easily and fluidly. There have been some challenges, and we expect that perhaps can continue, and it was well noted in the survey that has been something that boards have faced. Moving forward, we did want to explore a bit more, both through the survey results themselves as well as with some of the anecdotal discussions and interviews that we did on the back end of the survey itself. Are all digital boards more effective? We have a good friend and someone that we work with very frequently, a gentleman named Matt Fulbrook, who's with the Johnston Center for Corporate Governance Innovation at the University of Toronto. And he mentioned to us, and you'll see more of his insights and thoughts in our report that's coming out next week, and you'll have an opportunity to download this. He made the important note that when you get everybody on the same platform, effectiveness increases. And that may be a bit of motherhood and apple pie, but certainly, again, we see in the survey results that there is the opportunity for better collaboration, more fluid and comprehensive communication, and even the ability to be more strategic when similar and when consistent platforms are utilized. And in this case, those digital-first platforms seem to very much be of utmost importance. So what was the main factor, we asked, for increased board effectiveness? And 59% of the respondents said that they cited remote work and virtual meetings. And we thought this was certainly interesting, and I'll provide one anecdote that I think might be important. I spent some time a few days ago with a group here in the Midwest. I'm based in Chicago. The National Association of Corporate Directors hosted a meeting of directors, and one director noted that the virtual board meetings have democratized the board environment, where literally each board director occupies the same digital space, as it were, which has allowed perhaps better and more diversity of voices being heard at the board or in the virtual boardroom. So it wasn't a surprise perhaps to us that 59% cited remote work and virtual meetings as being one of the reasons. 40% also cited change in the general business environment. And again, by virtue of some anecdotes that we've heard, we do know that humans, all of us, have a tendency to rise to the occasion. So that we were, as boards, more effective over the last 12 months, in part can be attributable to the fact that it is exactly what we needed to do, or what boards needed to do. I had one board member recently that mentioned the business was at risk, and therefore we had to focus on the most highly strategic decisions that affected the ultimate outcome, which is saving and ensuring the business continued to be a viable interest. So I do think there is a portion of this that can easily be attributable to the broader business environment. So moving from the boardroom to the Zoom room certainly enabled organizations that lagged in digital transformation to experience the benefits firsthand. And we did note some really interesting thoughts that the respondents provided us. I talk often about the fact that perhaps historically the digital hand of innovation has been unable to reach, in many cases, the boardroom. The last 12 or 14 months might and likely has been the catalyst for that change, and it will be very interesting to see how this carries forward in our next normal. The survey results did indicate that better preparation was very, very much one of the outcomes of this boardroom to Zoom room. Digital board management said 91% received materials 3 or more days in advance versus 78% of those that were not using software. As I mentioned before, leveling the playing field. Every board member occupies that same amount of digital space, more opportunities for perhaps less vocal members, which might provide better diversity of points of view and opinion that ultimately is accretive for organizations in making highly strategic decisions. And last but not least, a focused effort with digital board management. 94% consider board members better prepared for meetings versus 88% of those who do not use board management software. And while both percentages are high, it's a notable improvement. I think each board chair in any organization would likely say that they want their board members to be 100% prepared. So in a digital environment, to see that 6% shift might seem relatively nominal, but it is certainly very, very important, because the work of boards is certainly arguably the most important work that any organization does, most notably for their constituencies, their customers, and their clients. So making boards effective, it's my pleasure to help us take a look at this in a bit more detail. I would love to pass it over to my colleague, Doug Wilson, and Doug will take us through some very interesting insights. Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and thank you to all the guests that are on the webinar today. So I'm going to talk about making boards more effective, the common characteristics of boards thriving in the all digital area. And this is the sort of the space that I kind of live and breathe every day. What are those common characteristics that we see? And I'm going to focus on three areas. So first is the importance of a single system of record. The second is just really security across the board, security and flexible communication. And then finally, the ability to make agile decisions. So we'll go into each one of those in a bit more detail. The first one, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar can relate. The first one, is really the focus on having one place to go for all things, sort of board and leadership team related. Versus, the right side here that we're all used to in many, if not most parts of our lives, which is, was that message on Slack or was that on Teams? Was that an email? I've got to go find which email address that was sent to. And while that is what we experience in a lot of places, it does create a lot of friction in terms of the way a board operates. And so one thing that we know to be true and see this every day is that having that one place to go where you have a place to store documents, you have a clear place to go to find a specific meeting and be able to look at the agenda for that meeting, whether it's coming up or a meeting that's happened in the past. Being able to have communications inside of that platform, so you're not having to think about, was that a text message that I sent to Bob, or was that a Slack message, but that messaging happening in one solution, and then also task management. So if you have, if you're taking action items from a meeting or assigning out specific tasks from a meeting, again, not having to think sort of where does that thing live, but that anything related to your board or your leadership team is happening in that one system. So it may seem like an obvious thing, but I think without it, the friction that it causes is pretty significant, and really can lead to a lot of just inefficiencies, right? We're all busy, we're trying to do lots of things, mostly trying to do too many things at the same time, and that inefficiency can really slow things down, slow down decision making, et cetera. So that's one area that we know to be a big way that a board can be more effective and efficient by just consolidating that information. The second area is around security, and this one again is sort of one of those areas where security is not an option. It's so critical today, and the threats are real, and it takes a consistent focus on security. And that we're taking this very seriously. And I know this group knows that better than anyone. But, as you're thinking about solutions, just making sure that all of the pieces of that solution are in place. So, we've highlighted some here. I won't read these to you in detail, but, that the organization has the right sort of credentials. So whether that's SOC or GDPR, but then also, in terms of the way your organization works, is two-factor authentication important, or maybe it's not an option for you at all. Maybe you have to have a solution that has two-factor authentication. Does the solution have the right granularity in terms of permissions, and sort of a balance there? So it could be too granular, and that creates sort of complexity that you don't want to exist inside the solution. And then we don't have it on this list, but I think even something like single sign-on, is that something that you're using in your organization today and that you want to be a part of this single solution from a board perspective? So this area is very important. And I will say, sort of related to the previous slide, another thing to think about is, because security is so important, if you are using multiple systems, so if you haven't gone to a single solution approach, and it's sort of a combination of emails and Zoom and et cetera, now the security gets even more complicated because you have to be managing that security across different applications, managing permissions across those different applications, and making sure you've got the right users with the right level of permission in each of those systems, and that they're working together as best they can. But I think there's a connection to that sort of many channels versus the one channel that relates to the security piece as well. And then the last piece here is just that idea of agile decision making. The ability for your board to react to change and make decisions quickly. So, I mentioned earlier the ability to have a really clear way to message and communicate with your board members to keep people informed. So whether that's a direct message to a person, or whether that's posting a message on a dashboard, for example, for people to take a look at, understanding capabilities around the notification system. So, if you post something in the dashboard, is that going to send that user an email? Is that going to send that user a push message on their phone? And then also thinking about what copy is actually included in that message. So, for example, if you send a message, if I send a message to Rob and there's something in there that's somewhat confidential, is that confidential information going to be displayed if that person does get a push message, or if they do get an email? In our case, what we do is our message to Rob tells Rob that he has a message in OnBoard, and then he would click on that and it would bring him back into the solution so that he can read that confidential information. But it's just one area to think about there. But the real thing here is to be able to sort of move quickly, make decisions, and then and have a record for those decisions being made. So whether you're taking formal votes, but in a digital space, so that vote's easy to take, anyone can do it from anywhere, and it's getting recorded so that you have that for historical and record-keeping purposes. So that's sort of the Agile piece of this, and certainly the digital space can really be a huge benefit here as we all are separated, not just because of COVID, but we're just the way that we work and where we live. And then finally, I'll just touch on a few things. So when you think about, if you're not using sort of a single solution today, the idea of a digital roadmap for your board, how would you start to move toward a single solution? And we'll just sort of break those down into three kind of really easy areas. First, we would say that digital transformation isn't an option. We're all using digital in our lives in multiple ways today. So as we're thinking about that in our organizations and for our boards and our leadership teams, we have to think about how do we optimize for the digital space, and how do we make that as effective and efficient as we can. The second one is you don't have to do all this at once. So if this sounds overwhelming, if you are using multiple systems today and you're trying to figure out, well, how would I start to transition from those multiple systems into a single solution? Break it down into logical steps. Maybe there's picking out the highest priority areas, whether that be security, whether that be communications, whether that be a place for your meetings and your agendas, but break that down into steps that are logical and prioritize based on the highest value areas first. You don't have to do everything at once. And then, the third item here is really interesting. Identify digital versus face-to-face needs. And I think the reason I say this one is interesting, on the surface, we would certainly say, wow, it's great to have this option. It's great to have an option to be digital and have some people face-to-face. And one thing that I would highlight, and Rob mentioned Matt Holbrook from the University of Toronto, and in the report, he has a really compelling sort of statement where he cautions against the idea of having hybrid meetings, because he's essentially saying, kind of back to the point that Rob made, you know, the idea that everyone is either in person or everyone is virtual sort of gives everyone a level platform to have a voice in the meeting. And I think once you start to break that up, and now you have some people in a meeting and some people that are digital, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, we probably have all experienced it even today. It's a very different dynamic. The people that are in the room have a different, they're on a different level, the communication is different, and there's a disadvantage to those people that are on the phone. And so while it on the surface seems like a great benefit, and it certainly is a benefit, I would just say for this group, really think about that and decide, you know, is a hybrid meeting going to work, or does it make more sense to think about which meetings should be in person and which meetings are better to be done hybrid, are better to be done digitally, but don't necessarily sort of bring the two together. We do a lot. We're experimenting with some of this, and we certainly have a lot of meetings every day where we got everyone's digital for the most part now. We're starting to see some people coming back into the offices. But I think this is an interesting one here, is to think about that all digital, all face-to-face, or some hybrid. What's the right thing for your business to do? So with that, Rob, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, and that's a really, really important point. As Doug pointed out, this grand experiment of working from home or working in this new normal it can be interesting, and maybe even more interesting is how we now adapt and what does that mean from a go forward point of view. We do have, speaking of points of view, we do have just that, some recommendations as it relates to you and your organization as you think about, and maybe you are a digital first organization, or maybe you're contemplating that. We have some thoughts, and I know there's an opportunity for you to get a copy of this and download it directly from the presentation. But I did want to highlight a few things that have been important to our customers and the interactions that we have with them. First of all, this notion that video conferencing alone is insufficient for smart, deliberate group decisions. And we often talk to customers about this idea that, well, we feel like we're in a really good spot. We've gone fully to Zoom or another video-based conferencing technology, and while that's an important step, it may be in some respects the lowest digital bar for organizations to get over. Not that it was insignificant in making that migration, but nonetheless, it doesn't yet fulfill the full promise of what we saw, certainly in the results of board effectiveness and how boards are collaborating. So certainly keep and continue to utilize video conferencing, especially as you look at how you and your board and your leadership teams want to manage that digital first environment. But consider each platform's suitability from a remote meeting standpoint. And there's a lot of aspects, many of which Doug talked about previously. Those are all of utmost importance. Certainly first and foremost, and we hear this from our customers every day, is security, leads atop of the list, simplicity, ease of use. So we strongly encourage you to evaluate platform suitability for your organization. Third, we point out that find a product that's designed for virtual meetings that integrates with best-in-class conferencing apps like we talked about. Zoom, Teams, there's a whole host of others. Most organizations, as Doug showed previously, utilize a whole host of collaboration tools. The best-in-class platforms are those that are going to integrate natively and seamlessly into those applications, business applications that you are using today. And that tends to be, and certainly is, a key decision point for organizations as they move forward. And then finally, board software that centralizes information and facilitates real-time collaboration and helps enable remote decision-making is crucial. We've certainly found this, and we've had customers tell us this loudly and clearly. The time to making decisions, even in this next normal environment, if anything, has expedited. So to have to necessarily move from a digital environment back into an analog environment can slow organizational decisions down. So finding tools that help facilitate that real-time collaboration and decision-making is very clearly an important construct as we move into this next normal. So this is it in terms of what we're prepared. I hope and I believe there's a few questions that are coming in. At this point, I'd love to turn it back and see if we can answer a few of those for the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, I am going to revert back to the buyer guide slide. So as Rob alluded to, you can actually click on the link right on this slide. It's a live link, and it will open then in a separate window, so it's available to you following the webinar. So I'm sure you want to take advantage of that. And Rob, I'm going to leave it on this slide so folks have an opportunity to do that. And as you mentioned, we do have some questions, so let's get started. Okay, the first question: what are the downsides to going 100% remote or virtual in the future, or continuing to go virtual? And then kind of a second part, what about blended or hybrid meetings? That one might have come in before you talked about it, but where some of the board members are in person and some are virtual.
Yeah, I'll take that. And Doug, please do feel free to chime in and add. So to the first part of that question, loud and clearly in the survey results, we did hear that the biggest missing component are for the complex discussions, the personal interactions, the esprit de corps, perhaps, as you might think about it, that very often is or needs to happen and should happen within boards and leadership teams. That has easily been and far and away the most obvious, if not missed, the challenge that boards face in this all virtual environment. One thing that we have heard in some of the post-survey interviews is that many organizations might look at, to Doug's point earlier, which meetings will be all virtual, which meetings will be in person. Many organizations are looking at perhaps at a committee level. So compensation committee, as an example, might be, in all cases, a requirement for face-to-face. I'm making that up. But what an organization might look at is the intricacies of each of those meetings or subcommittees, understanding what needs to be accomplished and what setting is going to be best utilized to ensure that the organization reaches the best outcome. So do strongly recommend that organizations take that approach. And I think Doug's comment earlier, which might touch on the second part of the question, is important there as well. Moving to a hybrid environment does have its risk. I think most of us have probably experienced that, where 3 or 4 of your colleagues might be in a room and chugging along really, really well through whatever needs to be accomplished, and you're trying to get an edge in or word in edgewise. So be careful with that. Doug, anything you would add there? And did I catch all of that question? I hope I did.
Yeah, I think you got it, Rob. I think you summarized it well. I think the only other point I would just reiterate that you made was sort of don't treat every meeting as the same. Really think about what is it you're trying to accomplish in a meeting, and then decide what is the best format for that. So if it was a meeting where you really wanted to promote a lot of discussion and collaboration and brainstorming, maybe that's a meeting that's better done in person. Whereas if it's a meeting that's a bit more tactical, maybe it's sort of going through a list of things that you're voting on or making sort of relatively clear decisions on, that might lend itself to be a fine meeting to do, either completely virtual or hybrid if you need to. So that would be the only other thing I'd add there, but I think you covered it well.
Great. Okay, next question. Any recommendations for convincing more traditional or less savvy or tech-savvy board members? So how do you persuade holdouts that the benefits outweigh the learning curve?
Wow, great question. I mean, we all sort of are resistant to change, myself included, and so it can be an obstacle for sure. I think one thing that we really think about, both from a training perspective and also from a design of our application perspective, is what I would call sort of progressive disclosure. So, we're sort of tempting when you have a new board member to train them on sort of everything from beginning to end. But the reality is, if they're only going to use a few things for the first few months or more than that even, don't train them on everything from the very beginning. Just train them on the things that they need to know initially to help them sort of get warmed up to the solution, feel confident in the solution, and then add to that over time. And like I said, we do that through a combination of training, so splitting it up over time and really understanding what are the highest priorities, but also from a design perspective of our system. So helping through in-app messaging, things that the board member might be trying to do, we can sort of anticipate and give them some guidance on that. So I think that's one way to handle it. And then I think making really clear connections to what are the things that they really liked about sort of the non-digital space, and making it really clear sort of how those things are transitioned into digital. So for example, if they love taking notes on a notepad, what is the equivalent to that in the solution that you're looking at, and trying to draw their attentions to the similarities and not the significant differences. So those would be a few thoughts, but it is tough. We see that for sure. It can be a challenge.
Okay. Do digital board platforms work if I'm a member of several different boards?
Yeah,
Great question.
absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, Rob, I was just going to say absolutely. We have a lot of scenarios where we have a board member. I think the largest number I've heard is a single person that's on something like 25 boards. I don't know how that's even possible in terms of the time in the day or the week, but I think that's the biggest number I've heard. But absolutely, it's something that we think a lot about and that we're focused on in terms of what's the right way to handle the different organizations, what information needs to be 100% siloed, and from a security perspective, the data is handled appropriately. And then what are other areas, like for example a calendar? That board member might really want a calendar where they can see the meetings for more than one board that they serve on, so they're not having to go into two different places to see that. So the easy answer is yes, it's very important. We definitely see a lot of use cases where we have a single person serving on multiple boards.
Great, thanks. Okay, another question. What happens to our boardroom data if we move from one platform to another?
Well, the good news, I'll take that one first, Doug, and you can chime in as well. The good news is, at least on our platform, what we are very, very passionate about, it's a non-starter, in fact. An organization's data is just that. It is your data. It is not ours. Security is the utmost concern, and we've built our platform from day one to not only be highly secure, but to ensure the integrity of our customers' data. So with that being said, to the extent that an organization were to move onto our platform or off of our platform, the data is always going to be held in the most secure environment possible, including in the rare situations where organizations move away. That data travels, of course, with them. Perhaps more to the point, and what we see more often is organizations that are moving from either what we might consider to be a traditional digital environment, meaning they're using commercial off-the-shelf tools, some of which Doug talked about earlier, and they're moving and porting into more of a tailor and board-ready solution, including like ours. We do a lot of work, and we work with our customers to ensure that data transfer, again, happens both securely, efficiently, and comprehensively. The good news is, and maybe the most important implicit portion of that question is ensuring, again, data integrity and security. It's a must-have. We do know, and we talk to our customers all the time about how important that data is in ensuring that not only is it protected, but it remains secure. And I know also at a product level, at a platform level, we spend a lot of time contemplating how, when, and to whom different permissions and different persona types in the software have access to data at any given time, understanding that whether it's at the committee level or at the group or leadership team level, certain information and data, customer data, be appropriately filtered out or providing access to. So our point of view is very resolute in that data security and integrity is job number one.
Great. Okay. Seeing no more questions, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I also want to thank Rob and Doug for sharing their expertise with us today. Later this week, watch for a follow-up email containing a link to the recording of today's webinar. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again. Have a great day and stay well.